Are you looking for a podcast where you can hear from real people regarding their real dental drama? If so, then you've come to the right place. Join hosts Bethany Petty and Dr. Rena Kuba as we dive into the solutions we've created and the mistakes we've made while managing dental drama. Let's get started.
Hola, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm still in spring break mode. Went to Cancun for a couple of days and
just looking all sunny and refreshed
yes,
and happy.
Yes. But I wanted to move past that, kick myself back into reality.
Let's get back to the drama.
Yes, let's get back to the drama. It never stopped. I just stuck my head literally in the sand, and and here I am now. And I wanted to. I think the last time we met, we talked about culture.
Yeah.
And accountability some and all of that, because I think that continues to be those continue to be pervasive themes of what you're having to deal with in offices. Sure. And so anyway, and I think for a while there I was covering my head because I thought for sure people listening to the last podcast that I was on, I was going to be egged, drive-by egging. So I know I said some pretty strong opinions on things. You were just
crusty. It's okay to be crusty every now and again.
Yeah, but I perhaps my delivery would have been different, but my thoughts and feelings are still the same.
The same.
Anywho, so fast forward from that, you were gracious enough I recruited you to speak at our study club meeting, and I asked you to talk about culture because I feel like, again, that's something that even just my people in my dental community area where I practice, I hear a lot. People are asking me questions about, different staffing issues or whatever it is. And so I was like, no, I think this is very timely. Please come talk about that. So you, a very shortened version of your culture seminar that honestly could have gone on for a couple of days. Like if we wanted to dig into everything, and you had, a short hour session. But anyway, so it was a lot of what we talked about in the podcast, and kind of a reminder, like you had run through another office through the culture flow, if you will, like start with another company that has good culture. Okay, what do y'all like about that? Now, how do we translate it down to our team, and what do we want for our office culture? What can we all agree upon to try to see if that would help kind of get people on the same page in an office? Yeah. And so I really thought that could be beneficial. So we talked about it in the study club, and you had a great worksheet to kind of help dentists get that going in their own offices. And I feel like one dentist in our study club asked a really good question, and I was like, excellent point, ma'am. And she brought up and asked you in the study club meeting, Bethany, this is great, like for you to be able to talk to each team member and figure out where their sticking points are and all of that, but they don't give us the same answers. Like as the dentist, if we didn't have a Bethany and we went in and went, okay, I'm going to try to work on culture in my office, and part of that is me listening to what each team member has to say, they're not going to be honest with me because obviously I pay their paycheck, and they're going to tell me one thing and then go act another way. And I was like, that is a very good point. Yeah. However, then I thought about and went, okay, but Doc, are you asking the right questions? For example, if you're saying, hey, so are you happy with everything? Or what are you unhappy about? Or tell me what changes you would like to make? Or is everything okay? Those are probably the questions that as dentists, we think we are being good at being detectives and gathering information. And it occurred to me that those may not be what's gonna be getting us the information we need. Right. So I kind of was like, well, what does Bethany ask versus what I think she's asking? And maybe is that the problem, where we're not asking open-ended enough questions, or questions to really kind of hone in? And are we asking too many vague questions? Right. Such that we're getting nothing. Or does it not matter what question we're asking? We're always going to get an answer they think we want to hear. Yeah. And so I just kind of wanted to pick your brain on that because I thought it was a very valid point when she said...
Such a good point.
Yeah.
Such a good perspective to have in the moment. Because I do think, to answer your question, I think the team members are always going to talk differently to the doctor. So there's going to be either information that's lacking, or they skew the way that they talk about it, or they'll say something but then try to counterbalance that with a positive statement. Well, yeah, that's a problem, but doc, blah, blah, blah. And so I think there's always going to be a disadvantage that the doctor is going to have. However, I still think the doctor can have productive conversations with their staff members. So I don't think it's a lost cause, so to speak. But I think there's some foundational things that need to be in place. And so I want to kind of talk with you about foundational things, and then we can talk about the specifics of the questions that we could ask. So a lot of times I do get, when I'm interviewing team members, I do get really open and honest information because I try to approach it in multiple ways. But I lead out in these conversations with, everything you say is confidential. I am not going to share anything that you specifically say with the doctor. However, you need to know that I will share themes that emerge from various team members. And those themes are going to be anonymous. They will just know that collectively from your team, I've gathered that we need to work on this, this, and this.
So sorry, real quick to interrupt. What if you've got a team of 2 or 3? Mm-hmm. There's not much
anonymity.
Thank you. With that. Yeah.
Exactly. That's going to be where it's hard. The doctors that have smaller teams, they're going to have a harder time pulling very specific feedback because there is no anonymity to it. And so I do think before doctors even try to engage in conversations, there needs to be this foundational trust factor. So the reason I say it's anonymous to team members is because, first of all, I hold to my word always. I never say this team member said XYZ. So I'm truthful to my word, but also that team member knows that there's going to be no backlash against them. I am a safe place in that moment to share information with because it's anonymous. And second of all, it doesn't impact me, the person that's asking questions. It's going to impact what we do together, but it's not an offense to me. It's going to be different when a team member has to share that same information with the doctor, because there very well could be things that need to be said to that doctor that could be somewhat hurtful, or even like, I don't mean to offend you, but this is a problem. So there's got to be, before conversations even happen, there's got to be this foundation of trust that the doctor has with his or her team, that they know they can say something to the doctor without there being retribution against that person or offense that's taken. So I think the doctor himself or herself is going to have to get themselves in a place where they can hear direct feedback without having some of those defensive responses. So either I'm going to defend my actions, or I'm going to explain why I do it, or I'm going to make you feel stupid for making that suggestion. Like, the doctor is going to have to work on himself or herself to make it a safe conversation. Now, you being a doctor, I want to hear your thoughts on that, because that sounds relatively simple, and I actually feel like that's a hard...
Oh, I think that's brutally difficult.
Okay.
Because, for example, for myself, I'm very sensitive. And I do everything intentionally. You know, if I'm making a decision, I'm like, okay, I've thought about this, this, and this, and with good intentions is what I'm trying to say. It's not like I just kind of went, oh, well, this is just what I want to do because it's going to help my schedule, or it's going to make me most money, or whatever it is, right? Like, it's not all about me. I've already taken the time to think about my team. That doesn't mean I've gotten it all right. Yeah. But I think my team knows that about me and gives me grace with that. But I think in general, yeah, if I knew that I was going to have to sit with an employee, I mean, there's plenty of times where I make you do it because I don't want to hear how awful I was in the situation or how stupid I was by making that decision and not considering the obvious impact on whatever, right? So I do think for a doctor, it is difficult to be like, I'm in charge of this place. I pay your paycheck. I work my tail off. and you still don't like me or don't like what I did. Like, it's just a hard spot to be in, because I think most of us do make decisions with a certain amount of intentionality. And again, like, to be told that you were wrong when you did that, or you missed the mark, is hard to hear. So my question as you were saying that was, okay, then how do we get better? Like, are there classes you take to not be so sensitive? Is it a communication thing? Is it...
I think there's going to be people that are more sensitive to feedback or to conversations. And I think you'll know that from your personal life, quite honestly. So if you're, highly offended if your spouse or partner gives you feedback and it takes you 2 days to get over that feedback or something like that, then you need to know that you're going to need to do some mental prep work. And you and I have talked about this a lot. I'm a huge fan of counseling or coaching or whatever outlet you want to call it, but somebody that's willing to help you get better at receiving feedback, because the number one thing that can kill dialogue between a practice owner and a team member when you're asking for culture type feedback is the doctor's going to get really upset about it, or she's going to stew on this for days, or a week later she's going to make catty comments about, well, so-and-so's not happy, so I guess I got to work on that. Well, nobody's going to give feedback if that's the outcome of it. And so whatever outlet you need to go and work on yourself, if you know I can't step into that conversation without there being some personal offense or me dwelling on this for weeks, well, then you're probably not in the right place to have conversations with your staff members yet, and you need to get help in how do I become more open to this.
Which is, I think, what I had to do. Like, that's honestly, now that I'm going back and going, how did I get better? I'm still not perfect at it. It's still like, I've got to pause and go, I know this conversation's going to put me in a position where I'm going to get really upset for whatever reason. Like, I'm going to feel like you're not appreciating me, or you're not, whatever, you think I'm an idiot. And, but that's a me problem.
Right.
And so I think for me, when I go back and think, how did I get better at it? Honestly, I think it was you helping me, like watching how you did things and going, that's how I should have said that, or that's how I should, like, so, or again, venting to you. And that way I get all the venting out, such that now I'm not venting towards the team member.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it comes with a certain level of trust too, walking into that conversation with your team member and knowing you might hear some things that are difficult to hear, but if you trust that the team member's intention is good. And sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes we can't trust that. And that's understandable. But to at least mentally get to a place where in this conversation you trust that the information that's being shared is for the benefit of the practice, the team, even you personally as a doctor. And I think that takes some mental Olympics, to get to that point. But I think it's the right mindset to step into these conversations.
So then I start going, okay, like I do think, because I know I've vented, we've had multiple podcasts where team members will come and be like, you're the problem, or you did this, or you did that. And I do, I mean, I don't like it, but I do appreciate, because it does make me pause and go, okay, well, clearly I'm not on the path that I thought I was, because I'm being viewed this way, or I'm being questioned that way. But to your point, and you've said it at each one of those times where I do vent about it, where you're like, yeah, but you can trust that teammate has a higher purpose other than themselves. Like, they really are thinking about the practice. So then my next question for you then, for people who maybe are younger practices or who have had more turnover and are having to rebuild that trust, this is where then, how do you do that? Is this where you kind of, why we talk about the touch point, like having more individual meetings more often. This is why we do team building and things like that, to
putting the time in to establish those relationships. And to me, it's okay to we've got to, first of all, invest time in building good relationships, team building, one-on-ones, performance reviews, all the typical things that we've talked about. But even we may not be fully solid in our relationship with that individual before we step into one of these conversations. So don't wait until you're 2 or 3 years in and you're like, okay, now I can trust her. No, you may have to take a leap of faith at 7 or 8 months in and go, okay, now I can engage in a feedback type conversation about culture, and I'm going to just assume trust. I'm going to walk into this, even though we're not there yet in our relationship, I'm going to assume that anything she or he shares with me is going to be out of good intentions. And to me, that's a better assumption to make than the alternative.
I agree. And I think it does have to go back to yourself. Like, if you have been operating where they have a reason not to trust you. And I think for me, what's helped me has been the transparency of things. Mm-hmm. So I admit when I'm wrong. I admit when I'm struggling to make a decision. I admit, like, these are the hard parts of this. Mm-hmm. And this is what I'm weighing out with Bethany. Because, like, we could do this, but this is going to be the downside of it. And so I'm sitting here trying to go, how is this best going to serve all of us, if anybody has any thoughts on that? Mm-hmm. So I think that transparency, vulnerability, whatever you'd have it, which again can backfire on you at times, where then they either view you as an idiot or view you as, oh, well, yeah, we're all equal parts of making this decision. No, we're really not. I'm still going to be the decision maker, but I do want some honest feedback.
Right.
So I think it does go back to the doctor and their personality and how they interact with the team.
Yeah. And establishing some good foundations before you engage in a conversation like this. So I would call it a foundation of trust. There's got to be a trust that the doctor brings to that conversation, that this person is going to share things with me that should benefit me. And yes, they may offend or sting in the moment, but I'm not going to let my mind rest there. I'm going to let my mind go to the content of the conversation or what they shared. And then also that team member has to have trust towards the doctor that, hey, we've got enough of a relationship here, even if it's not long term, we've got enough of a relationship that I can trust that there's not going to be a negative outcome to this conversation. I'm not going to be punished for things that are shared, or that what I share is not going to be shared among the team as well, which is another component of trust. So I think before we even try to engage in what to ask or what to say, we need to focus on establishing that level of trust before these type of conversations. Then we move into, okay, we've got trust established. I've got my mindset right as the practice owner. I'm about to step into one of these individual conversations where I am asking for feedback. What is our culture like? How are we doing? What can we do better? So I've got my mindset right. I'm assuming the person that I'm talking with I can trust. The team member has had time to prepare for this conversation. So we got a foundation of trust. Next is allowing the team member to prepare. You cannot willy-nilly pull a team member in and go, how's it going? They haven't had time to formulate thoughts on, they don't even know what you're going to ask. How could they have well thought out things to say if they haven't had time to think about it? One of the reasons that I think my conversations with team members go so well is there's a bunch of paperwork, homework is what I call it, that they have to do before they have a conversation with me. And that paperwork is turned into me a week or two ahead of time before my conversation. So they've had time to think through all these. These are very what I would call neutral documents. But one of them is a job description builder. Tell me about your role in the practice. What are all the things you do? List them all. List them all out, because I don't know this person, right? So some of these are not going to be helpful to a doctor, but I'm getting to know this person for the first time via paperwork. Where do you spend your time? What do you wish you could spend more time on? This is on the paperwork, by the way. What do you wish you could spend more time on? What are the things that you consistently don't finish each week? How could we improve that, right? So I'm trying to build an idea of what their role is in the practice. And then a separate one is a goal builder. So it's just practice goals, and it's open-ended. Short term, 0 to 3 months. List your goals for you, team member. List your goals for the practice. And anyway, it goes on down. And then it ends with your purpose statement. Why do you do what you do? Why do you come to work every day? Why does it matter, right? So there's all these kind of purpose type questions at the end of the goal document. So they have to do that a week or two before they talk to me. I have a week or two to review it with, and I'm looking for just subtle clues that I can pick up on. It doesn't have to be paperwork that the employee has to fill out, but they need to know before they step into that conversation, what are we even talking about? So I would suggest for a practice owner to have questions prepared that you're going to ask your team member, written out questions, so that that team member knows what you're going to ask and they have time to think about it. I would say at least a week before the conversation. Any thoughts on that before we...
I love that. I love that. So I guess, yeah, if you could just kind of point, I know you've given us several examples here, but I mean, is that what you're suggesting, is to do at least one that talks about goals for the practice? And maybe if it is somebody who, obviously, like, the doctor knows this person, like if it's somebody like me stepping in and going, okay, how am I going to conduct this? Then I don't need to know I don't think it's a bad thing to go, what are you spending your time on? What are the tasks you enjoy that you do? What tasks do you wish you could learn about? And maybe, like, where do you see this practice going? What do you think are the strengths of the practice?
Yeah.
Is that the time to ask that or not?
It is. Okay. So I would say, depending upon the practice owner's level of relationship with that particular employee, if they're a newer one, let's say 6 or 7 months in, it may very well be appropriate to do a more thorough questionnaire for the employee that does say, what all are your roles? How confident do you feel in each of those? Rate them 1 to 10. What's your most confident category? I think it would be okay to dive deep into an individual's role. If it's somebody that you've worked with for 7 years, you're probably going to need to know less about that, and you can ask more of the time-related questions. So with your current role right now, categorize for me how much time you're spending in each of your categories. What do you want to spend more time in? What do you want to spend? So what I like about these type questions is it gets the employee thinking about their functionality in the office, which is a very safe place to talk, to start the
their
conversation.
Contribution to the office.
Exactly. And then if we have given our employee that ahead of time and they've thought through their role, then when we step into this culture type conversation with that individual, we're starting with something that's so neutral, so common ground, their contribution. We're talking through their role. It gets them kind of warmed up, so to speak, for more detail or opinion type questions. If we just jump into this conversation and we go, okay, tell me what's wrong with the practice, it's not going to go well. They're not going to be as open as if we start with something that's very well known to them, which is their role in the practice and what needs to change about that and what do they want to learn more about. How can I help you with that? Okay, now we're jiving. Now we're in this great conversation. My employee's feeling really good about it. I'm really interested and intrigued to know what she has to say about her role in the practice. And then there are subtle little things that'll start to fall into that conversation. Little comments that you can start to pick up on. Like, for example, how would you reorient your time? One of the conversations I had recently in the paperwork, I was like, holy cow, this lady has a ton of tasks on her plate. And then she would line out the amount of time. And if you added up all that time, it was like 45 hours a week. And so one of my questions to her was, how are you doing all this? Well, it's hard. And she would start to talk about how stressful it is and how she really wishes that she could pass some things off. But right now it's on her plate and she can do it. She can power through, blah, blah, blah. And then I came back to her and I was like, why? Why can't you pass anything off to anybody else? Well, because nobody's willing to take it. Now, she didn't say that. She didn't lead with that. She was like, I really wish I could pass it off, but right now I can't, and I can do it. I'm strong. I'm tough. But what stood out to me was I can't pass anything off. And I'm like, I need to know more about that. So then when I come back and ask that slightly deeper question, why can't you pass off? Well, it's other people have a lot on their plate too. Oh no, I've seen everybody's worksheets, and yeah, everybody's doing stuff. But nobody's doing as much as you. Why can't you pass it off to Sally, for example? Well, Sally really likes her role. She doesn't really want to learn anything about XYZ. Ah, okay. Now we're getting somewhere, and now we've gotten to a culture problem that we can start to actually dive in on. But if I just say, hey, what are culture problems? She's not going to say, oh, well, Sally doesn't want to learn anything. Nobody wants to learn anything. Everything ends up on my plate. She's not going to say that. But her paperwork tells a story that we can, in that conversation, as she's saying, if she were to fill that out for the practice owner, and the practice owner's like, Sally, or Susie, why? Oh, this is so much. I thought Sally was helping you with this. Well, she did for a while, but she doesn't anymore. But why? Like, we got to fix this. This is the problem. I need to know more about this. What ways have you tried to pass off to Sally? And how does Sally deny your request? Let's talk about this. How can we fix that? Okay, now we're getting into culture type
so
things.
Here's where I can see, though, where a doctor going, but do I want to dive in that deep? And, now I've got a true problem. Now I got to fix, and I don't know how to fix it. Like, what am I supposed to do? Sally, you need to start doing this, and then Sally gives her resignation. Like, Now what do I do? Maybe, you know what? Susie, you've got it. Great. Keep getting it.
Yeah.
Good luck with that. And I'm going to turn myself to a different problem. So I think that may be why some of us struggle with asking the right question, because we kind of don't want to ask a question that now I'm going to have to deal with another problem.
Yeah. But the risk we run is, if Susie is our 45-hour a week, like I'm doing everything, the risk we run is Susie bails. And we don't want to lose Susie. So it's almost like we want to catch these problems before they're a problem that leads somebody elsewhere. So yeah, it's a problem that's been revealed. And to me, the way that we approach it is this a pervasive culture problem? Do we have one hard worker on the team and everybody else is kind of letting that hard worker carry the load, and they're kind of not lazy, but they're not working as hard as this one? We've got a culture problem. We need to change the expectations on the team, and that's where we lead more of this culture type conversation. What are the expectations we have of one another, and how can we fix the culture issue?
Well, and this kind of goes back to, I know we did a podcast once on like backup employees, and so it's like, how are you protecting yourself? Because if Susie leaves, or then if Sally leaves because she didn't want to take that on, but could we have resolved it in a different way than Sally taking that on?
Right.
And so by asking those questions, maybe Mary has always kind of wanted to learn this, but nobody's ever sat to train her to ask. Or maybe Mary thought that verifying insurance was really daunting because she did it in another office and she always got yelled at. Well, but that could have been the way that office trained you.
Yeah.
And maybe if we spent time in figuring out how to train you different, maybe you would actually like the task, but you didn't even know what the task entailed. Stupid example, but I think of this yesterday. My younger one is going into middle school, and one of the electives she wants to do is band, which just floored me. I did not expect that out of her. And so, okay, I'm not a band person. I can't play an instrument. I can't carry a tune. I can't whatever, right? So I'm like, okay. And I really wanted her dad to go with her because he did band. Well, he's out of town. And so it was me. And we walked in, and I guess like beforehand, they had to put down the instruments they were most interested in. Well, we come out of there and like none of those are the instruments she was interested in. Well, so then it made me go, why were you interested in the trumpet? Yeah. Like, you've never played an instrument before. So have you heard songs and you knew that was the trumpet? Did you just look at it and go, oh, it's a small instrument, I'm a small person, so I want to do that? Or was it, I've heard of the trumpet? Like, what did you really know about any of the things that you picked? Oh, you knew nothing. Okay, so now when we went in there and they let you touch the instruments and they let you play the instruments and they asked you questions about the instruments, and you could kind of see for yourself going, oh yeah, when they asked me to blow on this reed a certain way, I couldn't do it. Okay, I mean, I'm not going to discourage you from that, but you're going to have to work harder.
Yeah.
And I know my kid, I just am like, okay, where is she going to be successful here? And so the 3 instruments that she picked for her final list were not at all, none of her original ones. And it kind of reminds me of this. Maybe somebody coming in. We recently had one of our RDAs who was kind of like, no, I don't want to learn how to post payments or verify insurance, whatever it was that she didn't want to learn how to do. And when I probed deeper, why? And she said, well, it's just, I've gotten yelled at so many times before. And I'm like, but that's the training you had, or lack of training. Mm-hmm. And so you don't even know what the job entails. You have no idea. You may love it or you may hate it. We don't know yet, but you've not really dived, you've not explored it. So to me, that's where I start going, okay, but yeah, we're scared of going, okay, well, Susie's managing it, so I just let her manage it. But the risk we run, like you said, is a pervasive culture problem where there are other issues. And also, we're hosing ourselves. If Susie gets pushed to the limit and leaves, or if she has a car accident and can't come back to work, or if her husband is moving to Japan and she's out of here. Like, There's so many things that are unknown, and the fact that a lot of eggs are in the Susie basket should make us all very nervous.
Yeah.
We need to solve this problem for other reasons other than just the culture
Exactly.
environment, right? So for me then, if we're going, Sally's not ever going to be good at that. I don't even want Sally to do that. Okay, that's okay. But who else can help? Can we be creative and look at the whole team as a whole and see if there is somebody else who would be a good fit for that? We discovered that with one of our RDAs where she was like, oh yeah, in my other office, I verified insurance all the time and I knew how to do this. I'm like, where have you...
Yeah.
How come I had no idea about that skill set of yours? Like, how come it's been a year and now you're saying something? Well, we
Right.
never asked.
Right.
And so I think getting, we need to not be afraid of going, why am I looking for a problem? We kind of have to, because we kind of have to keep that pulse of our...
Yes. And your team members have a perspective, and I've always said this, their perspective is valuable. And even if one perspective that you hear is errant, it's completely wrong, at least you understand how that person is viewing a situation or their role, or you learn so much in these conversations. And a lot of times the feedback that you get allows you to make additional improvements. And maybe it's not a culture problem. Maybe it is just simply a distribution of task problem. The culture's great and everybody wants to help. They just don't know how they can help Susie who's burning herself out. Okay, well, we can set up some training. We can figure out some things. And thankfully, culture's fine because people want to help. And they always ask Susie if they can help. And Susie doesn't know how to pass off a task. And so let's fix that problem. Okay, great. It's not a culture issue. But I think if we are sitting with an employee and we're talking about their role in the practice, and we're looking for those little subtle things that we pick up on, that we probe a little further on, we're going to get some really good information that may lead to, do we have a culture problem? Could just be we need to do some cross training, or we need to do some redistributing of tasks. But then after we talk about that individual and we're nice and warmed up in this conversation now, and the doctor's showing a genuine interest in asking probing questions, and this is all great, that's when we start to lead to, okay, let's talk bigger picture stuff, which again, they should have had time to think about this ahead of time. But tell me, one of the questions that I like is, what are the best things about our practice and team? We start positive, great, fun, good conversation. We get to compliment each other. It's all touchy-feely. And then we go, okay, I got to hear from you on this. What are the worst aspects of our team? And then you might even preface the conversation with, every family has baggage. No family that you step into is going to be perfect. There's a lot of things that we just talked about that we celebrated about our practice and team. Now we got to flip the coin. We got to look at the dark side too. What are areas that are not great about our practice on team? And these may be subtle things. These may be big things, but I want to hear your perspective on this. And then that's when we start to shift into more true culture type conversation. But it's started from a foundation of trust. We've given the staff member time to prepare ahead of time because they know the questions that we're going to ask. Now, there's going to be spontaneous questions that happen that weren't on that worksheet ahead of time, but we've given them time.
At least you've got a foundation and a base and a thought process working. Okay, so my follow-up question for you then is, one, it seems like we should be doing this in general just to make sure we're keeping a pulse on everything, hopefully catching a cultural problem before it is a mushroom cloud of a mess.
Yeah.
So that's question number one. How often? Two, so now you're saying prepare and ask questions, have questions ready for them. So again, I'm thinking of this doctor in study club who was like, well, my staff won't talk to me. So my guess is, okay, when have you cornered them to ask them questions? I would be highly surprised if she had a sheet that she gave them advance notice of. And
Right.
maybe she has, but I've never thought to do that ahead of, like, I wouldn't have known that. And so I'm going to go out on a limb and say most of us wouldn't have thought that. So is this me? Like, I listened to this podcast today and then tonight I'm making a list of questions. Like, what am I doing?
So, first of all, you don't have to reinvent the wheel if you already have a structure of communicating with your staff in place. So, I would piggyback on to something that you've already got in place. Let's say that's an annual performance review. You could easily say, hey, your annual performance review is coming up next month. I'm going to add a document that I want you to think about in preparation for that. So yes, I'm going to be giving you some performance feedback, but we're actually going to start the conversation with these questions because I want to pick your brain on some things.
Okay, so that's assuming the thing is in a month. But if it's not coming for 6 months, I guess to me, this is where I don't like, if you're only meeting with your team member once a year, that's a problem.
Yeah, agreed. So I would say if you've got that already in place, then you can always tack onto this. If you don't, or that's too far away, then you could easily say, hey, you know what? April is going to be culture month for us. I really want to make sure that we've got a great team environment and that everybody's, fulfilled. And so I'm going to give you a questionnaire ahead of time. And we are closing early on Thursday. I'm going to wrap up the day a couple hours early, and I'm going to be able to sit with you guys individually and talk through your responses. Or I'm going to take every Thursday, the lunch in April, and I'm going to sit with one of you. I've got it scheduled out on the calendar. So the structure of it can be as movable as need be.
So I guess how I'm just thinking, like, what I would do, I would probably at this point, like, yeah, we're almost heading into April. April, May tend to be slower in a pediatric office. But we're gonna hit the ground. So for me, this is where I would say something like, this is a good time to make sure that we're a well-oiled machine before June hits.
Correct.
So yeah. I want to make sure that everybody's in the right seat with the right tasks, and that if there are any issues, and if they're not, high five, but if there are, we have a chance to troubleshoot and get things back up such that when June hits, we're good to go.
Yep, exactly. And time it out. I mean, if you're listening to this in March and April's historically a crazy month for you, certainly do not try to tackle this. Tackle it at a time that you're mentally ready to have some of these conversations. From a schedule standpoint, you can carve out time for it. So it needs to happen, but the timing of it is flexible. It's got to work for everybody involved. And I would say, if I could just have my perfect world, I would say do all your performance reviews and all of that on the schedule that you have set up, but once a year, focus on culture. And I would love if that's the same month every year. So maybe April's always our culture month, and we come back and we do these same one-on-ones. We have the questionnaire, we have the conversations once a year.
So I guess my thought on that is going, okay, but I've got a culture problem now. Mm-hmm. So now I got to go back and figure out how to build trust and ask questions, like whatever. So I think for me, like if I'm finding myself in that boat, would you say it would be more like, okay, I'm going to create a list of questions. Mm-hmm. And it might be like, okay, there seems to be some tension in the office right now. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Is that what you would do? Or what kind of questions would you ask and give it a couple of days in advance? If you know that there's a
culture problem, dive in. It's the same structure though. I mean, the only thing that's potentially lacking is going to be that foundation of trust that should be built.
And that we're just going to assume.
We're just going to walk into those conversations assuming that the person that's meeting with us is going to share information that is meant to be beneficial and helpful. And the team member may not necessarily have that trust towards us, but the way that we conduct that conversation and what we do with the information that they share can lay the groundwork for great trust going out of that. We may just have to work a little bit harder in that conversation to get them to open up and dialogue. But if we know there's a culture problem, just dive right in and get going on these, getting the questionnaires out to your team members and then scheduling the one-on-ones. And then usually it should lead to some type of team meeting. Culture. Fun stuff, right? Mm-hmm. I will say, like I said in one of the episodes, it is the undercurrent to so many problems. So I think it really is worth our time and mental energy to invest in this.
I almost feel like just the term culture is, at least throws me off. Because my first thought on culture is like, okay, I'm brown, I'm Indian, I'm a female, you're, like I think of literal culture like that. Mm-hmm. And then I start going, what does that have anything to do with my practice? Like, so I think it's almost like we need to rename it. Something.
Yeah, I agree with you. Now I think it fits in so many ways because if we think about our individual culture, our ethnicity, what part of the world we were raised in the perspectives that we have because of that upbringing or religion that comes into that, politics, like all of it creates who we are. And so if you take that idea of culture and you go, each individual practice, at least that I step into, has its own little culture. It's like its own little microcosm of what matters in that practice and why. Why does it matter? I think when we think about it in that way, culture makes sense. But I agree, it's a fuzzy word until you start to think about, if we were to think about our dental practice being its own little tiny town that we were raised in order to fit in this town, you have to walk a certain way, talk a certain way, behave a certain way, believe a certain way, do certain things, not do certain things. Then you're like, okay, that makes more sense. And that's the clarity that we're trying to create on the team.
Well, and I say this because at study club that night, we had several older gentlemen there, and I think they were just there for the CE and because they paid for their study club stuff. And one of them even said, well, what do you mean by culture? And you're like, well, that's the whole point of this workshop, is to define culture. And even when we left and we were walking out, he was like, oh yeah, in my office, it's the two people that have worked with me for 40 years and I just do whatever they tell me to do. So he was kind of like being funny, but in my mind I was like, okay, but jokes aside, older white male who has probably always functioned with a certain, if you've been practicing for 40 years, there's going to be a certain culture in your practice.
Yeah.
And my question to that is, then how do the new younger ones fit in? And can you absorb new team members, or are you struggling to make new team members? Because they are going to be very different than the people who started with you 40 years ago, where it was norm for women to listen to the men, and women's job was to take care of the male dentist, and we handled everything else, where you can just handle the dentistry. I was like, dude, that doesn't even work anymore. And I literally turned to him and I kind of went, because we were all walking out together. It was a colleague that's an orthodontist who's probably in her 30s, Indian, another one who's probably in her 50s, and she's Latin American. And we all looked at each other. We're like, okay, well, young looking, foreign looking females, we've not had that experience that you've had. So we needed this, lecture here. But I guess to me, I feel like people hear the word culture and are like, yeah, we're fine.
Yeah.
Because they don't really understand the impact and the value of it. Mm-hmm. I feel like people probably listening to this podcast, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably get it.
Yeah.
But
it's true.
But I'm just
That's a good point.
Thinking, I wish we could rename it something.
I know. Maybe that's homework for us, to come up with a new, fun way of talking about it that maybe makes more sense initially.
Yeah.
Because I think if you dive into it, it makes sense. But if you just think about it surface level, it doesn't seem to fit the topic.
Because I think about even new practitioners, or maybe not even new practitioners, but new owners, kind of going, what are you talking about? Like, I am here to build my office, and I'm buying my chairs, and I've got my bank loan to buy my instruments, and I'm marketing, and totally not getting, I know I didn't for years. Yeah. And then you come fast forward year 4, year 5, and you've got a whole different set of issues on your hands, and you're like, what the hell happened?
Yeah.
And I think it's the whole culture piece.
Yeah.
But because we didn't recognize culture, because we were calling it culture and not something else, it was not ever thought about.
Completely missed.
Yeah.
Well, even like you're wearing your CDCI Superstar t-shirt today, and that's the initials of your practice, by the way, for anybody that's listening. It's CDCI, which is your practice name, and then Superstar. And so from a culture standpoint, you go, well, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
Right? What does it mean to be a superstar at CDCI? And there's culture at the root of that. It means you adopt certain mindsets, you behave a certain way, you avoid certain things, and a superstar on your team has certain qualities that make them a superstar at specifically CDCI.
Yeah, in my office. But that doesn't mean when you leave my office
that it's going to work somewhere else.
Yeah, because it may not matter. The things that matter to me may not matter in that office. And the things that matter to them, you may not possess those skill sets because you were fine-tuned to work in Kuba land. And
Yep. That's it in a nutshell. So, okay, thanks.
Thanks for joining the conversation today. We hope that you are comforted in knowing that you are not alone. but we also hope that you're walking away with some really great tips and tricks to try in your practice. We value your feedback, so please take a few moments to rate and review the podcast. Finally, we want to make sure that we're covering the topics that matter to you. So track us down on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and let us know what topics you want us to cover. As always, please know that we are rooting for you today as you manage your dental drama.